Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I am an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos or produce these videos, however you want to call it, every week on a twofold purpose. One is to take my brain out of what I call percolation mode as the work of interpreting the text bubbles up through the coffee grounds, which are my brain. And switch from that into sermonation mode as I am beginning to actually write and prepare the sermon that I will preach for my congregation on this coming Sunday. The second reason for producing these videos is so that you, the viewer who have stumbled across this for whatever reason, whether you were looking for it or whether happenstance has brought you to this digital doorstep, so that you can gain further insight into the gospel lesson that is presented on a weekly basis. The text for this coming Sunday, which is March 29th, 2015. Palm Sunday also doubles as and is often called Passion Sunday. I'm going a little off book this time around. Now, it has become the typical tradition here, at least within the lectionary and within many different denominational traditions, to put both Palm Sunday and the Passion narrative together into one complete and total package on the Sunday that falls 1 week before Easter. Now, I personally don't buy into that. I think that, yes, there can be merit in the notion of trying to cover that entire week in the worship setting, thinking that, well, perhaps people will not be around on Monday, Thursday, or they will not be around on Good Friday to hear those different portions. So let's cram that entire week, which some scholars will claim that the final week of Jesus' life is the quote-unquote Passion, and let's cram it all into a single service. Now, I personally don't really like that. I think Palm Sunday is Palm Sunday, and so I will stick with the text of the Triumphal Entry. It's not exactly based on the lectionary, although this is set for at least that portion of the service. Oftentimes you'll see at the beginning of worship, people will process in waving palm branches and singing praises, and that's the Palm Sunday aspect or the Triumphal Entry aspect. But long story short, the passage that I will be preaching from this particular Sunday comes from Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. And this is the story of the Triumphal Entry, which is what happened on that Sunday leading into the final week. Just a little bit of background. Jesus has been traveling around, but he is now facing turning his face towards Jerusalem, as they say, as he's moving towards what he knows will be his eventual arrest and betrayal and death and crucifixion. So that's all coming up, and he's heading that way. So that's where we begin here at the beginning of chapter 11. Now, what's interesting to note, as I had mentioned a moment ago, some scholars will believe or will present that the entire final week from the Triumphal Entry through his death and placement in the tomb, that is the Passion. And what's interesting about Mark is this final week is hit very methodically. Perhaps even we could say that it's hit more strongly than it is throughout the entire rest of the gospel accounts. Within Matthew, and then within Luke, and also within John, a lot of these events are kind of compressed more. But here in Mark, we hear he enters the city and then he goes out to Bethany and he spends the night, likely at the home of Lazarus, who in John's gospel we hear he raises from the dead. And then the next day he comes back into the city and he's into the temple, and then he goes back to Bethany. And then the next day he comes again and something else happens. And then the next day he comes again and something else happens. So it's very methodical that we really cover this whole thing. And because of that, here in Mark's gospel, that final week of Jesus' life covers more than a third of the entire gospel. Now, Mark is, of course, the shortest of the four gospels. It's only 16 chapters long, so comparably the other ones are quite a bit longer with quite a bit more detail. But of those 16 chapters, more than a third of it is devoted to this final week of Jesus' life. So that's I think important to note and to remember. Also, that as that week goes on, the tension kind of begins to mount more and more and more and more, and the conflict that's going on grows more and more throughout that week. But getting a little bit ahead of myself. So the passage, again, now here 5.5 minutes into the beginning of our video, when they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethpage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of the disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say to them, 'The Lord needs it,' and they will send it back here immediately." Okay, that's the opening portion. So they're coming close to Jerusalem. We don't know exactly where Bethpage is. Just that's kind of ambiguous throughout our records, but we know that the village of Bethany, very, very close to Jerusalem, only about 1.5 miles, perhaps 2 miles away. So easily within walking distance. I mean, a person could walk there in half an hour or so. And so we know that Jesus is right here now, and that's where the Mount of Olives is as well. It's just kind of opposite of a valley away from the city, but very close. So we know that Jesus has arrived. And now he tells 2 of the disciples, sends 2 of them, hey, reminiscent of the whole mission of I'm going to send you out 2 by 2 to the villages and towns where I plan to go. Remember that? That's in there. But so he sends 2 of them, and in a bit of a prophetic moment says, hey, you're going to go and you're going to find a colt. Bring it to me. And if anyone says anything to you, just tell them, hey, the Lord needs it, and it'll be okay. Jesus is showing his prophetic nature here. Now, also, a lot of people will say that why a colt? Why didn't he just walk into town? This is because of fulfilling some prophecies for one thing, but also just that it makes sense that the triumphal entry would happen in this way, because if he is a king, quote unquote, this is how dignitaries would come into town. They wouldn't walk into town. They would come riding either a horse or an animal of some sort, or perhaps in a chariot or a litter or whatever. But they would not be walking. So that's why it's thought Jesus did this. Then we hear they, being those 2 disciples, went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing, untying the colt?" Just like Jesus said they would. They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat upon it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road. Others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessing is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Okay, so that's our gospel account. So we hear first Jesus say, hey, go find this colt. I'm prophetic. If anyone says anything to you, this is what they say. And the guys go and they find it. And lo and behold, somebody asks them, why are you taking this colt? And what's interesting to note about this, throughout this entire passage of Jesus' entry, as he's finally arrived at Jerusalem and he's coming in, and we all know where this is going, this is the only tiny little hint of any sort of conflict whatsoever. Like, hey guys, why are you taking that colt? Okay, that's it. And I've often said, or at least I've often thought, you have to be careful not to harmonize a passage with its counterparts within the other Gospels. And of course, this story of the Triumphal Entry is found in all 4. And oftentimes we see other conflict, particularly in Luke's Gospel. Now, Luke's Gospel, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious elite, the go-to biblical bad guys, squawk and say, hey, tell your people to be quiet or we're going to get in trouble. And but there's none of that here. There is no opposition. The people spread their cloaks out in front of him and wave what we traditionally think is palm branches. Actually, John is the only one that tells us palm branches. This just says they waved leaves that they had cut from the field. So it's probably like grass or branches or something. But anyway, they're waving it in front of him. Again, that whole proclamation of a dignitary or a VIP coming into town. They go out to meet him. There's no ESPN to watch, so they are, they're going to come and see what's going on. We hear, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, and blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. This is taken from a psalm, at least portions of it are, that they would have been familiar with. So that's kind of where that little chant is coming from. But they acknowledge, hey, here comes the king. Here comes the guy who's going to reestablish the throne. But then, so they do this, and Jesus kind of comes into the city, and seemingly the people just kind of disperse, and they go back to their houses or back to their hotels or their rooms where they were staying or whatever they were doing, and they're just kind of like, hey, cool, hey, how you doing, Hosanna? Okay. And they're back to their own thing. And then Jesus comes in, and this gets very anticlimactic. Jesus walks into the temple. He's finally made it into the city. All this uproar has happened and then seemingly stopped. He walks in. We just hear that singular. Jesus walks in, goes to the temple, looks around, sees it's 5 o'clock. It's time to get moving. And he goes back out to Bethany. And that's the end of it. Now in Matthew and Luke, we hear immediately as he enters into the temple, it's the cleansing of the temple. Big uproar. Jesus goes postal, throws a bunch of stuff around and gets a little crazy and says, don't turn my father's house into a den of robbers. We heard that story just a couple weeks ago. Here, that happens the next day. He's gone out to Bethany and then he comes back into town, cursing a fig tree that had no figs for him. Side note. And then the cleansing of the temple happens. And then he goes back out to Bethany again. And then they come back into town and something else happens. And so conflict, as I said before, escalates, but it starts with nothing. There is no conflict. Nothing seemingly happens here. But what's interesting is as that week progresses and the conflict escalates, the people supporting and surrounding Jesus diminishes. It starts with the crowds today who cheer for him, and then seemingly as soon as he enters in the city, they kind of disappear. And it shrinks down to the people that are with him. And gradually that number continues to decrease as the week progresses. We get to the point where it's just his followers, and then it's just his disciples that he goes to the garden with, and then he's just with the 3 disciples as he's praying. And then it's just Peter who's following along at a distance, and then even Peter disappears. And then and then we hear that there are women watching from a distance, but even they're not too close. And then in the final, even on Easter Sunday, the funny thing about Mark is the resurrection happens and the angels appear to the women, and the women freak out and run off and don't tell anybody. So the interesting thing about this lack of conflict now almost irritates me. I want there to be conflict. I want there to be some dissension. I want there to be some opposition, because then it wouldn't seem so bad just a couple days down the road when everyone turns their back on Jesus. But that's the reality of this world. That's the reality of the world that Jesus has come into in order to do something about, that the entire world turns its back on him and goes from singing his praises to utterly deserting him. That's very likely where I'm going to go with the sermon for Sunday. Now, it's a little bit early yet. Just a side note, I'm filming this on Thursday. Normally I film them on Friday, but I'm filming this a day early just because of some different things going on within the congregation that's going to draw my attention tomorrow. But as we move through this week towards Palm Sunday, that's the direction where I'm probably going to go. We'll kind of see how things continue to develop at this time. But if you have any thoughts or questions or comments or opinions or insights of your own, please, by all means, pop down into the comments section and share those. I love seeing those when they pop up, and you and I can continue this conversation with one another. Otherwise, hit me up on social media if you're interested in communicating that way. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, etc., I'm on there. So just look for me, you'll find me. Otherwise, I hope that you are having a blessed week as we come into Palm Sunday and begin this final journey towards the cross and then towards the resurrection that will come in just over a week's time on Easter Sunday. Otherwise, have a blessed week, and we'll catch you next time.